First up, the return to school isn't quite going as planned for many colleges. Students were on campus for just a week at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill before a coronavirus outbreak forced administrators to move classes online. More than 150 students at the University of Missouri had COVID-19 on just the first day of classes. And videos of crowded, mask-free parties like this one at the University of North Georgia are raising concerns that college kids just aren't taking the pandemic seriously. It's led some schools to take a hardline approach, like Ohio State, which suspended 200 students for violating their social distancing guidelines, and UConn, which evicted students who held a party in their dorms. Here in Boston, schools like Northeastern and BU are already warning students they could be kicked out or suspended if they violate rules. But are they doing enough to keep everyone safe? I spoke with Julia Marcus, an epidemiologist and professor of population medicine at Harvard Medical School, and Kirk Carapezza, managing editor for WGBH News Education Desk. Thank you both for being here. Kirk, let me start with you. It's good to see you, by the way. We haven't seen each other since the pandemic started in person. What are Boston area colleges and universities, and more broadly speaking, schools across Massachusetts, doing to try to get ready for what's coming this fall? And I'm wondering if what I'm really wondering is everyone kind of doing the same basic thing, or are schools all over the map?
They're taking similar approaches, but everyone's kind of doing things slightly differently. So, and it's still, we should say it's a bit early because, move-in days are fast approaching, but unlike other parts of the country, we haven't seen too many undergraduates actually show up on campus yet. So what I'm seeing so far is these schools are launching public health campaigns. There's a lot of focus on messaging. At Boston University, staff and faculty and students actually created separate campaigns. The student campaign, we can't say the title of that on public television here, Adam. Further, looking away from New England, at Syracuse, when undergraduates showed up, just within days, these students gathered and there's a party right on campus, and administrators really shamed them and said, enough is enough. Everyone's expecting you to fail, and really putting the blame on them. And Syracuse got a lot of blowback for that. I was on campus at Northeastern yesterday, and there's messaging everywhere. It was shocking, reminding you, to wear a mask, to socially distance. And there's a great quote. There's a sign I saw that said, "Get tested, but don't be testy." And Northeastern administrators are taking what I would describe as a very aggressive approach. They're scouring social media and trying to see if students who are, about to arrive on campus, whether they plan to party once they're back in Boston. And they found an Instagram poll where about 100 students said, yes, we can't wait to party once we're back in Boston. And the administration contacted the student who ran the survey. They then reached out to those students and sent them a strongly worded letter, and also sent the letter to their families and said, if you party on campus and if you don't sign this contract, then we will rescind your admission. So it's kind of all over the board. Tufts University in Medford is a little more lax. I talked with President Tony Monaco yesterday, and he told me that we trust the students and we trust that they'll do the right thing. But as you know, a lot of the students around here, they work hard and they like to play hard.
Well, they do, and there's also the question of whether you can trust full-fledged adults to do the right thing as opposed to 17-year-olds. But Julia Marcus, let me ask you, given your expertise in this area, as you look at what different schools are doing, does anything stand out as either really smart or potentially, terribly misinformed, however well-intentioned?
Well, we know the most important thing is going to be frequent screening of students, both when they arrive on campus, but then on a regular basis. And actually, ideally, it would be every 2 to 3 days screening the entire student body and not just students who are symptomatic. And of course, that's a really tall order, but that seems to be what needs to be in place to really contain outbreaks. And then in addition to that, I'm heartened to hear that there are these public health campaigns that are going on campuses, and especially ones that are led by students themselves. I think that will be most effective. But what I'm concerned about is the shaming and blaming of students that's going on, and even the policing of students on social media and in person, I think is actually going to be counterproductive and get in the way of public health efforts. And the reason I say that is I think that that kind of scolding and policing, we know from other areas of public health, will not deter the behavior. It will just make people hide it better. And what we don't want is for students to be reluctant to disclose symptoms, reluctant to share that they attended an event because they're afraid of being thrown off of campus.
Is there anything, you mentioned regular testing every couple days of the entire student body, and you acknowledge that that's a high bar to hit. Is there anything else that you would counsel institutions to put a priority on doing, whatever else they're doing around the edges?
Yeah, I think in terms of student behavior, what has really been missing here is some sense of nuance and harm reduction. I think the expectations for student behavior are largely unrealistic right now. And I don't just mean, crowded indoor parties, but expectations that students will not gather on their porches, that they won't play cornhole outdoors, that they'll keep their dorm rooms closed when they're in their dorms. It's just, these are really challenging things to ask of anyone, let alone, a 19-year-old. And so I think there needs to be some flexibility on the part of universities to allow for some of the lower risk socializing so that students can forego the higher risk socializing. So for example, setting up a tent so students can gather outdoors, and of course setting up some limitations around that are appropriate, but turning a blind eye when you see students playing beer pong in their front yard, just knowing that outdoor activity is going to be far safer than if they were doing it in the basement of a fraternity house, for example.
Kirk Carapezza, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but from the outside, watching this happen, my kids, thank God, are not quite college age yet. It seems to me like colleges are in a real bind here because on the one hand, they want to keep faculty safe, they want to keep students safe, but on the other hand, their whole business model, their whole reason for being is this very intensive, resource-intensive, face-to-face approach to higher education. Is there any concern among administrators you've talked to, even if they voice it quietly when the tape recorder is off, that if they're too good at showing that alternate methods of learning can work, showing that, for example, remote learning could work extremely well, that they might undermine their own reason for being?
Yes, I think, off the record, administrators will tell me this, that their model is at risk here. This pandemic is putting the entire, 4-year residential college experience under a microscope. And students are asking themselves, what is this worth? And many of these schools are already facing lawsuits from the spring when they, frantically moved their courses online. Some of these schools, including BU here in Boston, is being sued for refunds. Right? They refunded the room and board in the spring, but they kept tuition the same even when courses moved online, and they're hoping to do that again. And so I think, some skeptics see this as, a bait and switch, right? They're trying to stay open for as long as they can this fall, cash the tuition checks, right, with the promise of in-person classes. And then when the courses move online, or if COVID starts to spread on campus, they might blame the students and then move all the classes online. Now, that's a highly skeptical view of American higher education, but even before the pandemic, Americans were deeply skeptical of higher education. It was, it's frequently President Trump's political, punching bag. 60% of Republicans in a poll in 2018 said that higher education, colleges didn't have the best interests of the country at heart.
Yeah, it's part of the culture wars. Sorry to, right. I want to give Julia the last word. I'm glad you brought up the politics of this, though. Julia, final question goes to you. Are there certain metrics that schools should be watching as we head into the fall to keep an eye on whether in-person education is responsible, like infection positivity rate, increases in the case count? Any key metrics that schools should look at?
I don't think there are any metrics that have been kind of nationally decided on for, the safety or reasonability of opening schools. But I do think we need to hear from universities some transparency around what the metrics are for closing. I think there's been questions about whether colleges should reopen, but now we're kind of already on that train. And, with UNC, it wasn't clear to me, they had some metrics around the number of different outbreaks on campus, but every campus seems to have some different metrics. They are not necessarily sharing what those are. And I think those are going to be important because nobody is expecting 0 infections on campus. It's just not going to be possible at this point. And so, there has to be some clarity around what is too much. And maybe that's a difficult conversation to have. And it's not clear what those metrics should be. But I think we do need to be talking about that.
All right, Julia Marcus, Kirk Carapezza, thank you both for talking this through. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks.